Good evening, everybody. Kia ora koutou. Na mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming along. This is the last of our talks, formal talks. We do have a few more events coming up tomorrow. But this is the last of our formal talks for this year's summit. And actually, it's a very suitable topic to end it, really. What will 2050 look like? We'll be talking about that in a few years' time to actually check whether you guys were right. But WOW is a registered charitable trust, and we can't exist without our sponsors. And before we do anything else, I'd just like to, since this is the last session, thank our principal sponsors, and they're listed along there. Central Lakes Trust, Otago Community Trust, Climate Action, Queenstown Lakes District Council, and the two tourism bodies, Destination Queenstown and Wanaka Tourism, and Greenhawk and EAS. Thank you very much for your sponsorship this year. It's been much appreciated. I'm Jeff Tompkins. I'm one of the trustees of WOW, but my role tonight is very, very simple. It's basically a bit of housekeeping. Could you please put all your phones on silent? We're not asking you to switch them off because questions will be coming through on Menti. And there's a code there, just in case you can't see it. It's 872-2247. And you can put your questions through there, and then they'll be moderated and come through from Rod Oram. Rod is going to be moderating this session and introducing the speakers. My part is to introduce you to the facilities. We've got emergency doors on either side. The toilets are out the back on the right. If there's an earthquake, please take shelter and then leave the building when it's all quietened down. And we gather across on the grass the other side of the river. And if there's a fire, you can run straight out across the other side of the river. I think that just about sums up everything. And again, I'll just give you that Menti code, 872-2247. Rod, it's my pleasure to hand over to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeff, for that very warm welcome. And kia ora tātou to you all, and a very good evening. And welcome to this historic mid-century WOW Festival. It's really hard to imagine that this is the 32nd that WOW has run since it was got up and running in 2016. It's my huge pleasure to and great privilege to be with you this evening, and with Angela on my immediate right, and then Vic next to her, and then on screen Emma from Hawke's Bay. And I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves to you in a few minutes. But first of all, thank you for coming along, because it was one heck of a party last night, and it's very good of you to come out 2 nights running, especially those of you who, like me, are getting to be rather advanced age in mid-century. But it was such an amazing moment last night where the Wanaka Queenstown Lakes District celebrated the official count that there are now 100,000 residents in the district. And if you cast your mind back to the early 2020s, when we had been trying to forecast what population would look like a few decades ahead, we only got up to a number of 82,000. But of course, that was very wrong for all kinds of good reasons, such as the attractions of this district, but also because of the need to relocate some people from around the country because of rising sea levels and the rest. And also, of course, it was so much fun partying last night, and on such a warm evening. It's hard to imagine that here we were at the end of October, and we were all sort of dancing around out there in short sleeves and short trousers and everything else, short skirts, in such warm weather. And of course, so there have been some upsides. And it's, when we look back over these decades, I'd just like to suggest, I think, something that many of us feel, that it's really been in the last 10 years that we've been able to make some terrific progress. And that 10 years is important because it's the 10 years we've had since the bicentennial of the signing of Te Tiriti, and therefore the bicentenary of our founding as a modern nation. And there was so much which we were able to achieve leading up to that, which has then given us a big way forward. So we have so much to be very thankful for across our relationship with nature, and I think what's been particularly important there has been to our Māori, that sense of oneness with the living earth and our responsibility to that, and across, of course, so many of our social and economic issues about over this time. But above all, this really important thing about how we were able to deal with far greater complex issues than we ever had in the past. And that too, I think, is one of our very great achievements. One last one, we still have another 65 days to go this year before we can finally declare that we are predator-free. And so we're all obviously on tenterhooks that there are no predators found in these next 65 days, dead or alive, which mean we still have a little bit more work to do. But it is quite remarkable to think that it was only back in 2012 when Sir Paul Callaghan threw that great challenge down to us, just literally weeks before he sadly died too young. And it seemed so impossible at the time that we could do that. And I was very skeptical at the time, back then in 2012. But then, within a few years, I began to see around the country how extraordinary it was that communities were coming together on this, and people who would normally cross the street rather than talk to each other were having good old yarns about what was the best bait and things like that. So that to me is a very important seed. But anyway, I'm going to come out and ask you, anybody out there who would like to chip in a few thoughts about what have been the great, not just achievements, but setbacks too over these decades. I'll be out there in a mo, but I wanted to very importantly give my fellow panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So, Angela, first of all, over to you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Angela Clifford toku ingoa. I also had a wonderful time last night with that party. I am slightly sad that I missed you in the short skirt, to be fair, but maybe 2070, we look for that moment. I used to run a national food movement in Aotearoa, a grassroots not-for-profit food movement called Eat New Zealand. I still live on the food farm with my grandchildren now. It's a permaculture property where we grow most of our own food and teach others how to do it. Over the years, I've probably been the go-to person that people seek out when they want to talk about the journey of New Zealand food. I don't go out very much anymore, and it's only because of the mana of someone like Rod and the wonderfulness of the Wanaka community that I decided to. Mostly I stay at home now like an old witch in a hut, and I encourage anybody that wants to talk to me to come and see me. I potter around in my garden. I'm growing things I've never been able to grow before, like cacao, pineapples, chocolate is made from the cacao because chocolate doesn't grow on trees. Took me a while to work that out. And we also grow different grape varieties than we grew originally. Mostly I'm still all about food and wine and its connection to Te Tau, or our natural world. Kia ora.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Angela. And good witch sounds great. Thank you. Over to you, Vic.
O kia ora te whānau, ko Vic Crockford tako ingoa. Yeah, look, I had a great time last night also, and I think the biggest benefit that I got was that because I finally sorted out my back issues in the 2030s, I was really out there on the dance floor, embarrassing my whole family. So it was
short skirt?
Probably short shorts, yeah. I find them much more comfortable for dancing, yeah. So I have had the huge privilege in the course of my life to commit my paid work and unpaid imagination hours to realising the right to a decent home here in Aotearoa. The huge highlight for me in my career and you know, aside from my my wonderful wedding day and the birth of my children, probably my life, was seeing the Human Rights Act passed in New Zealand, which specifically included a provision for that enshrined the right to a decent home across a whole range of rights, including, really importantly, for the work that we've managed to do in terms of climate change, habitability, which was all about how we achieved really great, warm, healthy homes that gave back more to the planet as much as possible than they took. So that was a huge day for me, and that was 2032. That took 15 years of solid advocacy from the day that the Human Rights Commission first wrote the guidelines for the human right to a decent home in Aotearoa to finally see that enshrined in legislation. The other thing that I've been really privileged to look back on is how far we've come when it comes to energy sovereignty, how far we've come when it comes to communities being able to stand on their own 2 feet in the face of all of the disasters we've experienced together. You know, they came thick and fast from the 2020s onwards, and it was a really harrowing time. But we responded, we stood up, we adapted, we came together as community, and energy resilience was this really big piece that was really hard and we hadn't figured out yet, and we were up to the task. There are still a lot of people who are left behind, and they don't experience very many hours of the day where they have access to secure power, but we are making progress. The other thing I'm really proud of has been watching my beautiful children grow and learn how to flourish as humans, despite the eco-anxiety that they and a lot of their friends started to experience en masse from the 2020s onwards. It became a really huge part of our lexicon and our psychological practice, how to support our kids through that eco-anxiety. But they were there at the party last night celebrating the way in which we've embraced our friends, our climate refugees from South Dunedin and others who have had to relocate, and all of the other people who chose to call this region home. And the final thing that I really, really raised a glass to last night, to your predator-free comment, Rod, was that I haven't seen a bastard rabbit at our property in 3 years.
Thank you very much indeed, Vic. And those equity issues across all of the economy and society have been so important. And so thank you for your work on that, the human rights aspect of that. And our third panelist is Emma, up in the Hawke's Bay. And I'm looking at the camera so she sees me there. Emma, you're about to turn up on the screen behind us here so everybody in the room can see you. And I'm just waiting for that to happen.
I'm terribly sorry. Emma's connection has dropped. So we're just trying to get her back as quickly as possible.
No, that's quite all right. I'm glad we haven't got all the problems the world solved in these decades. But now, I'm going to come out and see what's on your mind. Is it possible perhaps have the house lights up a bit so we can... So I don't trip over anything, but is that possible? Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. Also, just a reminder that there's lots of... One other way to feed in your thoughts in this, which is going to menti.com and putting in that code. You can see in very small print there, 8722247. And just in case you can't read that, I'll say it one more time, 8722247. And because I'm very keen to get a very full view of what you're all thinking. But anyway, I hope that some of you have been reflecting on these decades, and we as panelists are just very keen to hear some of your thoughts, because we're going to try and organize some things around themes to help guide us through the conversations the rest of the time. Now, here's a likely person that I'll turn to straight away.
Do you know what, Rod? I'm just totally humbled. I hope I make it to the 34th anniversary of Summit. I'm feeling a little bit creaky in the bones now, but so pleased that about 10, 15 years ago, able to hand the flame over to others to take this on, and just seeing the community, how they've pulled together. And it is a decades shift and it takes time, but bit by bit, I think it's reflecting back on all of the huge achievements that we've made over this time, despite some big storms having come through. Skyline gondola had a few shake-ups. There's not much topsoil left on there at all. It's interesting having going up and doing that bike race in winter on what used to be a ski field, which is really fun. But I think that we've really shown how resilient we are as a community. So thank you for passing me the mic.
Thank you. Any other takers here who would like to give us a view? Oh, here's another one. Thank you.
Thanks, Rod. Yeah, so 2050, I guess, makes me 72 years old. Working as a carpenter, only 8 years to go until I can draw a pension now. Thank you, Prime Minister McCaw. And again, just working in construction, I guess one of the things that's had to happen over the previous decades is people have had to become more innovative as the global supply chain issues that we kind of had never completely cleared up, and just requires more use of locally sourced materials and more repairs, and things have the skill is more in demand than ever, I would say, but things are not potentially as easy to do because you have to find things from what's nearby, and it's not always what we used to always get on time, next day, more recycling, and tough times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't all a cakewalk these days. We look around the world at a population now of pretty much 10 billion people. So in the many decades I've been alive, literally the human population's quadrupled in that time. And so those pressures are very intense. But I'd like to think that here in Aotearoa, we've been able to help pioneer a few things, particularly around our natural environment and particularly around our way we do democracy these days. That's been a bit of a help. Any other people? Oh, yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Hi. Well, it's really great that we've all learned to be more resilient, and our kids, my daughter's finally not locked into this consumerist sort of lifestyle, and we're winning the war on predator-free. We've lost so many species. We don't have any penguins anymore. Some of our native birds have gone, and that's really sad. So I personally miss skiing in winter, but I miss more the birdsong that we don't have anymore because the climate doesn't support them.
Thank you. I mean, we have lost a lot, but we could have lost an awful lot more on the trajectory we were on. So trying to have that sense of balance there, or sort of deep sadness, but then also some sense of achievement that we have managed to progress a lot more than it looked as though we might have done a few decades ago. Yeah. One or two more thoughts or questions? Oh, hey, there you go. Thanks.
Well, Rod, it's a pleasure to still be here. The genetic engineering and the new drugs have certainly helped. What I never thought I'd see in Wanaka was the bananas and avocados growing. I was born in Africa, and unfortunately where I was born, they no longer grow there. And to see them here just brings me back memories of my youth. And when we built a house here, it was fairly warm. It's not a perfect house by any means, but it was well insulated. And I'm so glad we don't use the wood burner anymore, but it really keeps it cool during summer. It's still a pleasure to live in Wanaka.
Thank you. Can I offer anybody the microphone here? Yes, there you go.
This is the last thing I was going to do. I'm coming in late too. I'm Monique Kelly's mum, and I just want to say that 9 years ago, she rang one day from France where she was living, and she said, Mum, we've got a house, we've got a school, we want to stay north of Auckland, and we've got a school that I want the children to go to. But she said, we just need somewhere to live at the moment. So I said, well, why not just come to Wanaka and the children can stay with us and you can go up and down the country until you get settled. And lo and behold, next morning on Skype, who should be on Skype but both of them? And they said, we've decided we're going to come and live in Wanaka. So that was the greatest thing that happened for me. And as I say, I just think I followed the journey with Monique, and I feel so proud of what she has done. Just to perhaps to have a little one, just on the side. One day I was looking after the 2 children, and that stage Carter was about 10, I suppose, and I had some Glad wrap, and I think I'd actually had to take some round there because there was none in the house. And that was okay. And the next thing, Carter said to me, no, you can't use that. And I said, well, Nans are allowed to do anything they like, actually. And so, would you believe, though, when I went to get it the next day, I couldn't find the damn stuff. And I looked all around and I thought, and then sure enough, I found it. And it was hidden right up on the top. He'd put it right out of way. So I took a photo of it and sent it to my family and said, look, this is the way I get treated by my grandchildren. But instead, they all came back to me and said, well, so he should be doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A chance up here for anybody who'd like to chip in a few thoughts. There you go.
Thank you. I'm really excited about the fact that New Zealand's next strategy after predator-free is half Earth, and we're trying to protect half of the country, and we're already at 46%, so I'm really excited about that.
Thank you. And does that, can you remind me what sort of percentage of our seas we've now got fully protected?
We're at 55% for the ocean already, yeah, but 46% for the land so far. And that's an initiative worldwide as well.
Yes. Fundamentally important. I keep on saying one last, but I would hate to deprive anybody who fancies a quick thought or two about this. Oh, here we go. I'm going to come. Excuse me while I just race through here. Excuse you, if you mind your feet. There we go.
Wow, he's pretty fast for 150, isn't he?
I was just thinking.
He's very quick.
He really sorted out his back issues.
I'm so glad that we decided to have kids, because in 2020 there was a lot of eco-anxiety, but we now have kids that are activists for mental health and the environment, and we're growing some pineapple and avocados in our garden. We eat everything off the land, which is amazing, and yeah, we have a compostable toilet.
Oh, this is great. We panelists are going to retire on it. No, keep going. No, please do.
In 2050, I think that the technology will be so good that we don't need to travel to go to the ski fields. We won't need to go to the coast for surfing because we'll be like Ready Player One, and we will have the full technology around us. It's not going to be the same, but we will still be able to enjoy it via the technology.
But you're not already doing that. I mean, this is what's now available to us in 2050. You are fully enjoying this. Yeah, fantastic. Good. I just want to catch you up with where we are. Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks. Oh, backflips. Excellent. Yes. And
yeah, I think back to what they were teaching at university about Kodak and how Kodak became a really obsolete company, and they talked about that in 2050. It's amazing that we're talking about that around Toyota, how Toyota never adapted and tried to pivot towards electric vehicles and just realised that the only way that people movement was going to be through bikes and human-powered things. So I thought that was really interesting. And General Motors, that did pivot, is now the world's largest electric bike manufacturer in the world. I think that was quite interesting. And airlines are still talking about electric planes being just 10 years away.
I'm still feeling very nervous about that first electric plane ride across the Pacific. But we'll see how that goes. Look, thank you very much indeed for those wonderful reminders of the progress we've been making. And have we got Emma back? No. No, okay. Well, you're missing a real treat with Emma, so we're going to keep trying. In the meantime, we're going to pick up on a number of themes there. Let's go first to the food one, Angela, because we've been hearing about these wonderful once subtropical plants that we're growing here in Aotearoa. In terms of when we look back 25 years or so ago, our farming systems were still really quite stuck. We had some real pioneers starting around regenerative agriculture and the rest, and something of a shift away from livestock. But what was it you felt that really got that transformation going in land use and farming systems to where we are now, and our ability to incorporate new crops that, as a bit of a benefit of climate change, now are very much at home here in Aotearoa?
Yeah, well, you've all got one of these, right? So I think this was probably the most transformational piece of technology that came out of the 20s at all. As you know, basically you now have a personalised nutrition understanding, and all you need to do is use your scanner across whatever it is, your piece of fruit, and it measures in real time nutrient density. And so what that means is that it's given all the power back to the eaters and away from the global companies that are trying to sell you something that isn't real. And it's had a really profound effect, because when measuring nutrient density, it means that those that are using agroecological processes are thriving. And in fact, ultra-processed food crashed, as you all know, in about the mid-1930s, and that was as a result of it being deemed addictive, as we all know, and it now, as you know, has the same status as drugs and alcohol. And so that saw the end of commodification of nutrient-lacking food and the rise of mana-centred local food systems. So clearly, this little piece of kit that was being developed since about 2015, but really hit its straps around 2027, changed everything and handed the power back to eaters.
And that power for eaters is a really important one, and I think we're all relishing. But that was such a shock to farmers who were used to our farmers putting large volumes into sort of global supply chains. That was a very difficult transition for them to these relationships with consumers, farming more diversely. What do you think were some of the key ways we were able to have that conversation with them and help them make that transition?
Yeah, it was super interesting. So I remember distinctly there was a piece of research that was done in 2023, and it discovered that the rural-urban divide was a complete fabrication, and that they discovered that New Zealanders and urban New Zealanders thought farmers were awesome. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of that polarisation, and that sense that farmers were polluters or extractors. And I think the country really came together from that point onwards to work collectively towards health, because now the most important thing in food is its connection to personal health. And so we just don't eat stuff that doesn't serve us. And that's seen us through another 2 pandemics with, really low levels of significant illness and death, because we've made that connection between food and health.
One last point, if I may, before we move on from food. I've always been a business journalist, so I still am. And I felt that one of the most important ones was to quite rightly give farmers other income streams besides that they got for their milk solids or their meat, for example. And so the development of biodiversity income streams for them, so rewarding them for using their land in biodiverse ways, I think was really important. It gave them a sense of, it was still a business for them and a passion, but one for which they were rewarded in a more rounded way.
Absolutely. We stopped using the stick and started using the carrot. And I think things like biodiversity credits, from memory, really set that off. And so that farms were seen as places that communities had an investment in, and that they were like the lungs of all of us, and their ongoing health was really important to our personal ongoing health. So I think that connection really changed everything.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move on, if I may, Vic, to you, to the electricity, because we talk so much about working with nature and not against it these days, and that in a real sense applies also to the way we imagine energy and electricity. So can you sort of flesh out those thoughts for us about how the whole energy system has evolved in New Zealand in these recent decades?
Sure. I think when I think about those kind of trigger points or moments of catalytic change, I kind of go right back into the reaches of time to 2 years that are really important to me, because they were the years that my 2 children were born. So the first is 2014, and Ngāti Tūhoi settle with the government and their treaty settlement, and as part of that, Te Urewera, which was formerly a national park, is granted personhood, legal personhood. And then a few years later, in 2017, after 150 years of advocacy by iwi, the Whanganui River is also granted legal personhood, the first river in the world to have that status. And the reason those were trigger points, we kind of didn't think about it at the time. It was novel law, and the kind of, the constitutional geeks could get really excited, but actually what happened then is, because they had that status, in 2028, our first big energy company, it was Meridian, if I recall, was the first to put nature on their board, because they had the Whanganui River as a legal person to appoint to their board. And the Whanganui River was given the same status as all of the other directors, had voting rights. And interestingly, what that caused, despite the fact that there were a lot of people who thought it was a stupid idea, and if I recall, the government of the time, wasn't very supportive. Deputy Prime Minister David Seymour, in particular, thought it was laughable. But what that did was it caused a mindset shift. It caused a mindset shift that started a snowball towards where we are today, which is very much that we have to exist in a relationship with our energy sources. We are not extracting them. We are in a relationship with them. And it made us realize that we can't just carry on a taking relationship, and that we might, in fact, need to do two very hard things at the same time. And we'd been really resistant to the idea of decentralizing our energy system, because our energy system up until 2030 was very, very engineering based, and to basically throw chaos theory into the middle of a linear system was really, really felt really, really dangerous for some people, actually. But the call for community energy after the cyclones that we experienced from 2023 onwards on an annual basis in and around the East Coast and the East Cape really ramped up, because we realised that our ability to look after each other in the wake of these disasters was very dependent on our ability to have some supply of energy, particularly for our hospitals, which were trying to phase out diesel generators, but had no other options. So we did this really hard thing that was catalysed by Meridian putting the Whanganui River on their board, which is that we decentralised and centralised our energy system at the same time. And what that looked like was this kind of intense, crazy experiment where we had Transpower able to invest loads and loads of money. They unleashed Transpower's ability to invest in the national grid so we could get lots of power all around the country much more efficiently, at the same time as the government actually put their money where their mouth was and put money into community energy networks, which meant that we here in Wānaka and Queenstown got our first two community energy projects up and running by 2027, I think it was, and it gave us the opportunity when we had our really significant flood event in 2029 in Queenstown to make sure that all of our key services were still able to run without a hitch, because the batteries that we'd installed were in the right place at the right time and able to kick in. So it was a really exciting time. It was a scary time, and the reason it was scary is because what we didn't get right, and we're still grappling with, is how we make sure that it works for everybody. There are still people who are only able to access electricity 3 hours a day in parts of Northland, for example, and the grid is experiencing severe blackout periods still because of the heat waves that are coming, so much more frequently during the summer. In fact, what felt like a heat wave, in the 2020s is just now the norm, as you said, us partying last night in our shirt sleeves. And short skirts, yeah. I guess we got a lot right, but we also, it wasn't without harm and it wasn't without hurt, and it also wasn't without a lot of engineers being really freaked out. Yeah.
I remember David Seymour, he came to a bit of a grisly end, didn't he? Ooh, that would have been painful.
It would have been really painful. I hear that barracuda bites are savage, yeah. They were coming in further and further to the coast because it was, the oceans were warming, yeah. So they're really vicious fish, yeah.
Again, I'm reaching back into my long business journalism journey, and the thing that I still marvel at is the way we were able to deal with vested interests. So whether it be in agriculture, whether it be in the energy sector, people who'd worked terribly hard to build their business models, invested very heavily in them, and only wanted to move things on at a speed and a direction that suited them fine. So they weren't ready to take that big leap. And I think one of the crucial aspects of that was being able to, as hard as it was to accept, to be able to incentivize them to make those changes, and therefore we were coming up with ways to make such incentives for change, big drivers of change, but making sure that those people are also involved in a just transition. Looking back, do you think that was money well spent, or do you think we should have taken a rather harder line with those vested interests at the time to find other ways to move them on?
I think that most of them died. I also think that their descendants really saw the world a different way and realised that they were talking about their survival as a species on this planet, and that the way that they approached their relationship with nature, I think really the re-indigenisation of Aotearoa really helped that. It was a great humbling as we understood our relationship in terms of nature. And I think, that young generation that ran after that idea and held on to it really negated that vested interest. And while there were remnants of it for a long time, I really felt that it was completely overrun by this incredible generation of young people who literally saw the world a different way. It was a different worldview, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I do have a deep sadness when I look back and think about what I regret in life that, I personally didn't see sooner that those vested interests should have been moved on quicker. I think I believed probably for longer than was true or wise that they would eventually do the right thing, or that they were working towards that, and that they were capable of that. And I think there were some that were incapable because of the very nature of their type of business and the way that they were structured. And it took a very long time for us to get our heads around the fact that shareholder primacy, this idea that a business must return at all costs a profit to investors in a really narrow economic model was really dangerous and harmful. So I do wish that we'd listened more to the climate scientists and the activists, and that we'd started acting earlier. And I think about that from the perspective of, the incredible work my kids have done to work through that sense of eco-anxiety that's so affected their generation. So I do look back and I think about a couple of, how we used to talk about tipping points when it felt relevant, and then it kind of just everything was tipping. I think about 2023. We hit the lowest sea ice maximum on the record, and then a year later we started seeing some of our first trickle of climate refugees, and we had to come up with a new visa category, and that would cause this big debate about how many people we were going to take and who would we take, which countries should we take them from. So it was like this quite horrible thing that we had to go through, where we were like, what's the cap, What happens when the boats start coming? How do we deal with that? We've never dealt with that before, and we had to go through that as a society. And I think those were the moments where those vested interests sat up and went, wow, this is the real human impact of what we've contributed to, and the ones that weren't acting started to act, and then the rest, as you say, they died. They died.
In a grisly
They died
way.
out.
No, I'm joking.
We outlived them. It's good.
I think there was a tipping point in terms of food in 2023 as well. There were 600,000 New Zealanders who had to access food charity in a given month. 600,000. Back then, that was the population of Canterbury in 1 month. So inequity had become so prevalent as part of our society that really it saw that sort of dissolution of those power structures that we had seen dissolving, some of the lowest voter turnout, just a distrust in the powers that be. But out of that came something that was really awesome. So, yeah.
I want to pick up on that point in terms of politics, but can I just do two things? Are we still minus Emma? Yeah, okay, thank you. The second one, though, is I just want to check that you're all okay with the Menti code, because I'd love some more thoughts from you. Have you got that number there, 8722247? So please do send us some thoughts, because we're very keen to reflect what you're thinking in our discussion here. Thank you. In terms of politics, I thought that we would never get beyond sort of tribal politics. It felt as though it was getting worse. It was getting worse around the world, especially after, against all odds, Trump had a second term, albeit briefly. I felt that a good moment for us came after, God, I can't remember what COP it was. It was the one ridiculously in Dubai, a petrostate.
Was that
23,
28?
Yeah.
28.
But anyway, the Aotearoa Party, or National as they were known as at the time, began to see that they couldn't get a sensible climate coalition together with their, or policy together with their coalition partners. And so the cooperation agreement they signed with the Greens in early 2024, I thought was the first step in trying to get a very different kind of politics where people who have a different ideological base could still come together to achieve some common good. Was that do you think that was a turning point, or is there some other ones you might identify in the years after that where the whole nature of politics began to become more constructive? Still big debates, but we were able to work through issues and get some stuff done.
Teal is a terrible food colour.
Teal?
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't match anything, right? Teal and pumpkin. Yeah.
Yeah, I think AI really had a role in the demise of polarisation. I think we realised quite quickly that we couldn't trust anything we saw online anymore. So we really withdrew from that space and came back to what we could see and touch and smell and taste and hug. So that ability to find and connect with each other as real humans became much more important. And I think that when we withdrew from those online spaces, we also broke down some of that polarisation in terms of politics as well. So for me, I felt that was a real tipping point.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like that that retreat into real life from the online world really helped to build that that movement, that Aotearoa, that coming of age as ourselves that happened throughout the 20s and 30s that you were talking about, that re-indigenisation and the reckoning that I know I went through as a Pākehā around becoming tangata tiriti, and it certainly helped to remove that element of disinformation, which had started becoming this ferment of anxiety and anger and violence in our society. And it certainly was instrumental in cutting short Trump's second term. So we can all be thankful for that retreat from that online world. I also think with the National Greens Cooperation Agreement, one of the things that really triggered that, and this comes back to how important it's been in the last 20 or so years, this idea of kind of the narrative and framing the narrative, is that the entry road in for National, I think, was when the insurance industry and the banks it stopped loaning money to people or insuring houses and assets, and the banks in particular kind of got their shit together about pricing climate risk, and a whole lot of our assets just didn't get money anymore in our farms and things because they were unwilling to take that on their books. And when half of South Dunedin and a huge bunch of housing in Wellington and Christchurch and West Auckland just could not get any insurance, and National had to come up with that government backstop insurance policy, they realised that we can't do this without, some sort of decent climate kind of policy and approach, and the Greens were the natural partner in being able to actually mobilise and develop that. So, if that economic paradigm forced their hand, but what it did create was a whole different kind of conversation and narrative around the possibilities of collaboration after that.
Funnily enough, I got a question here that reflects some of that. It says, realistically, do you think so much of Dunedin and Napier should have been abandoned, or should we have built barriers and committed to protecting the cities and the surrounding Napier farmland? That's a really difficult issue, because that's a massive job of engineering to do that. I mean, the Dutch had obviously done it. But that idea that we could have had a bigger engineering response, particularly in places like Dunedin and Napier, versus a more natural response, do you think we've got that balance right? That we haven't gone too far down the road of just relying on a nature-based solution versus a big engineering solution?
I think what happened in Canterbury in the mid-2030s really changed that. Canterbury is, as you all know, a region of braided rivers. And in, I think it was 2033, the Waimakariri, which comes out just in North Canterbury at the moment, reverted to its original course, which is basically to meet up with the Rakaia. And it swept through Christchurch City, and there wasn't a stop bank in the world that could have prevented that. I think really that made us realise the power of those natural systems and our insignificance. Of course, the Alpine Fault earthquake also contributed to that too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that when it was finally decided that Napier had to retreat, it personally broke my heart. I'm from Hawke's Bay, and I often thought after the first cyclone in 2023, Gabrielle, as I'd go back to visit all these places that were markers of my childhood, and in particular Napier, my teenage years, because it was far enough away from where I actually lived to be a place I'd want to go. It was that moment of confrontation around the fact that the things you love and the places you love, you might actually have to let them go. And that moment started in 2023 for me, and when that final decision was made about Napier, I remember I just couldn't get out of bed, because it was like the start of a whole new world, really, that, a place of such significance to you personally, that wasn't going to exist anymore. And I think that was the start of our reckoning. And I agree. I just think we strove so long for technological fixes to inherently complex ecological crises, and whilst it was important to implement those technological fixes where they made sense in places like Napier and Christchurch, they stopped making sense anymore. And so we had to learn to live with the change and not constantly fight it, because the fight was more exhausting.
Yeah. It's a really important reminder to me that we should be careful not to put too much technology in the hands of people too old, because I realised there were actually a lot of questions here, but I was scrolling the wrong way. Moving right along. I needed to get that off my chest.
I think you missed your afternoon nap today, Rod.
Well, it does. The first question, top of the list.
How's your digestion, like your personal nutritional?
It's looking good. Good readout. But there is a really important question here that does deal with ages. Have you heard the rumours of when David Attenborough's next series is coming out? I mean, look, the Beatles do you remember when the Beatles released a new single because they'd extracted John Lennon's voice alone from a demo tape? I mean, these things can happen. Anyway, David Attenborough.
It was an incredible moment. And look, all I can say is long live David Attenborough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was amazed that Mick Jagger was on that last one as well. Yeah.
He's preserved.
Yeah. But actually, a reminder, we're not perfect. Can you believe that Air New Zealand is still giving out plastic wrapped lollies?
You know, I thought they would give that up the last time their flight was grounded by protesters chaining themselves to the plane. But, you know, some corporate habits seem to die really hard.
Yeah, I've heard they're holding the plastic wrapped lollies as hostage to the people who claim they're about to deliver electric airplanes. That you deliver the airplane and we'll ditch the plastic wrapper lollies. I think that's the deal. Moving on, do you think UN Secretary General Thunberg's push for a moratorium on oil extraction, because we still haven't quite got there, have we got to a tipping point where the residual vested interests no longer have the power to stop it?
Look, I think that narrative, again, back to the stories we've told ourselves, that a really important narrative over how important those last vestiges of oil were, you know, for people who had no access to any other form of energy. I think that was able to be used to our detriment by the vested interests for so long, and was able to be a get-out-of-jail-free card, you know, around some of the opportunities for ending the really hugely expensive and technologically difficult practice now of oil extraction. You know, it's so hard to get to, and there are so many stranded assets out there. All of those old oil rigs. It really is devastating. The and is I think that we are so close to a moratorium because I think that this, you know, the collaboration we've been able to regain in our politics has led to this consensus where the UN is actually so much more effective now than it used to be. Do you remember we had that period where the UN was basically just like a lame duck that occasionally made a speech and kind of didn't do anything? But now, you know, it's actually really effective at its job. And so I think with their leadership, and we can actually get there, I just think that we have to stop the vested interest using the argument of equity, which is so important, as a way for them to continue doing their harmful practice.
Yeah, I think, you know, there have been exceptions as well. I know that Australia needed to continue to mine coal because they can't grow food anymore. And New Zealand is actually their farm now, which is great because they're the size of London and they're 3 hours away. So we don't actually export our food anywhere else now except for Australia. And so it's quite a different relationship. And I think I understand why there needed to be that transitional period that Australia needed to, because of the just unbelievable climate that just was no longer possible to grow food there. They really needed some time to work out how they had any productivity at all. But I feel like they've transitioned now, and yeah, makes sense.
I'm pulling together a couple of questions here on climate refugees, because on one hand we've done a lot relatively for our Pacific neighbours, because some of them have lost their lands and their homes completely. But the question is, looking back, how did we manage to get to the point that we were welcoming quite a large flow of Pacific Island climate refugees here? But then the other question that is coming up is, shouldn't we be doing more because of the scale of climate refugees around the world? I mean, our population is still only just below 7 million. in a land that's the same size as the UK, for example, with 12 times the population. So those two things. First of all, what was it that sort of enabled us to open up to more Pacific climate refugees, and should we be doing even more because of the global scale of this?
Yeah, I mean, in 2050, our breakdown of New Zealand population is 25% whakapapa to Asia, 20% Māori, 25% Pacifica, and only, I think, 35% New Zealand European. So that has radically changed all sorts of stuff, including the diversity and deliciousness of our food. I really feel that it's been a blessing in so many ways. One of the things that I often think about is the only onshore fishing right now is catch to order, and that's allowed time for our inshore areas to replenish. There's no trawling anymore. And we were amazed at how well those places came back. And so their contribution to our food culture, to have kaimoana now on the centre of our plate and an acknowledgement that we are a South Pacific island, has been just such a positive. And I think that we really see ourselves much more as a Pacific island than we ever did. So it's a positive for me.
No more Little England, no more Better England.
No, I mean, we still do eat some, beef and some meat and dairy, but it all comes from regeneratively grown agroforestry systems that can sequester carbon through soil and also through native plantings. So, yeah.
And the thing I rejoice about most in that is the way naturally we've helped those animals get virtually to zero methane. None of these vaccines or, deep scientific interventions, but just feeding them well and letting them live well has dramatically reduced the methane, which we thought, was argued for the longest time we were never going to do or be able to do. It was going to be terribly costly and high science and everything else.
Yeah, well, remember there was that year that we did try those vaccines and all those cows exploded. So, yeah, I don't think that was ever a good idea.
Yeah, no, but there was a simple explanation for that, because the first process in one of the early stages of their digestion is hydrogen, which which is why naturally that they change that into methane. So when you don't get the methane right, if you mess around with the methane, you get too much hydrogen, and boom.
I mean, another good reason why we never got serious about hydrogen cars.
But I must admit, I do love hydrogen trucks. I think there's anyway, it's just the big boy in me, I guess. Right, now here's a wonderful question, because hindsight is a fine thing. If we look back a couple of decades, what do you think has been the greatest advance that we've made on our climate issues around about 2030? So if we look back about 20 years, what was the biggest breakthrough there on our climate issues?
I think building on what we just discussed, it was this emergence and this coming of age as a Pacific nation, and having a different understanding of our responsibility to the very rare and precious, indigenous forestry and animals that we have here in our oceans. That was huge because it was identity. It was an identity shift, and the cultural identity shifts, as we've found out, are the biggest and hardest but most impactful ones to make. I think the other thing that really happened was, unfortunately, we just started living through so many highly impactful disasters, and it forced us to do things differently. The the cyclones and the floods in 2023 and 2024, they really were just the start. I think I know when one of my grandparents died in the heat wave in Hawke's Bay in 2024, that was the moment for me, that I realised that this stuff is really coming for us. Even though I knew that, and I'd been involved in climate action, and for 20 years before that, and so I think once things got really personal, we came into our own agency. It was the decade that we realised that we have power as a collective, and we started to use that power, and our politics changed, and our planning and preparedness, and our care for community, and the way we thought about where our food came from, how it got around the country, how we use energy, and how much. We started having to think about everything. And taking responsibility as individuals we knew was really, really hard, even though we'd been told for 30, 40 years before that it was all the individual consumer choice. We realised that it wasn't. It wasn't. It was a collective responsibility, and it was the actions of really large corporations that needed to change more than the individual. So when we started to, come into our own agency and our own ability to work collectively, I think that was the moment that all of those other technological, policy, legal, regulation issues, they cascaded from that.
For me, it was probably the rise of ecofeminism, the rematriation of the world. So not just by women, but by the feminine in all humans. And we had some global leaders in that space. Dr. Jessica Hutchings, who introduced the world to the idea of soil sovereignty. And people that may not have seen themselves as ecofeminists at the time, but people like Nicole Masters, who leads the world in terms of thinking around soil and regenerative agriculture. So yeah, that was a really hopeful moment for me and my daughters in particular, but also for all the men who supported the vision and felt the same way. Yeah, I think it was a really positive moment in time.
If I may chip in my own thought on that, I felt building on things such as personhood for mountains and rivers, where we got confronted by this issue, we were the last large landmass in the world to be settled by people. But we were also then one of the land masses which had one of the fastest degradations and loss of species of that land. And yet, because we were one of the last land masses to be settled, we had complete indigenous knowledge, because that was only about 35 generations through to the early 2020s. That was helped us on that journey, and to become one of the fastest peoples in the world to bring nature back. Wrong phrase, to let nature restore itself in its own way. So one of the fastest degradations in the world amongst lands, but one of the fastest recoveries. And for me, it was that recognition of that huge responsibility we had, but also that huge opportunity we had, culturally, socially, economically, environmentally, that for me was, I think, a very big turning point. I'm just, I've got so many wonderful comments here. Gosh, here's one from A Tale from the Crypt. Do you think anyone has recovered from South Africa winning the Rugby World Cup in 2023? I'm amazed anybody's still asking that question, but yeah.
The answer is no, clearly.
I have a vivid memory of really wishing that we'd played England in that, because there was revenge required there. Anyway, moving right on. No, this is another heartfelt plea. I'm 92. The dementia drugs have been disappointing. Remind me how did we get rid of rats, rabbits, possums, etc.?
Well, do you know what? I have this, talking of vivid memories, I feel like it was around the same time as that Rugby World Cup, and so much more important. There was this amazing talk at the WOW, I don't know, I think it was like maybe number 6 WOW Summit, that I attended, and it really was a light bulb moment for me. This group, Southern Lakes Sanctuary, they committed to landscape scale community action around eradication. So they started with suppression of pests and kind of moved up the scale to eradication, and helpfully we all knew what that meant because we'd just been through that first COVID-19 pandemic. And they really were this incredible instigator into Waipounamu for getting collaboration between groups and really thinking at landscape scale. So they were successful in their elimination bid by 2030, I'm going to say, in this huge area that covered a significant part of Otago, and they were really the catalyst for the strategy that they developed over time. So they were this incredible blend of using the latest technology and mobilizing collective action. They had hundreds and hundreds of volunteers out regularly checking traps, putting in the hours, and they were going to the schools and running these amazing education programs, I believe. I think my kids went through them, where they learned, all about how to spot a pest, what the best kind of traps were. And at the same time as they were doing that, these technology companies who have been focused on stuff like mining tech pivoted and started using all their amazing brains to think about how they could create more humane, more efficient traps and at cheaper cost, which allowed them to scale up to something like 40,000 traps within this area. And it was just a real demonstration of how getting money, tech, community around the table could achieve something, and it set the tone. And other landscape scale projects were set up, and it's how we've achieved our Predator 2050 target.
Yeah, but there was that time just before that where the government tried to convince New Zealand that they wanted to introduce GE. And New Zealanders really pushed back against that, particularly because they didn't want it in their food chain. And the way that the government got GE into the country was because they used the predator-free thing. So basically, you could genetically engineer animals that would then not breed, and so they bred themselves out of existence. But as so often the case with GE, there were unintended consequences, and there was a mutant line, and it bred giant rats, and we didn't have traps big enough. So yeah, I mean, there was that.
That was horrific. Yeah.
It was a good use for fossil fuel cars, is to turn them into giant traps, but it was rather hard to get them into the bush and then get them out. It was quite tricky, I do remember that.
And they retrained all those rally drivers to just gun for them. Remember that?
Yeah.
They'd go round and round on the track. Yeah.
No, it worked though. No, it's good.